Good evening, dear viewers of the channel Conceptual. Today we have a very extraordinary guest, Mikhail Viktorovich Velichko, one of the main authors of our publishing house, a person in the conceptual movement, let's say not the last, if not to say one of the first. But let's leave all these preludes. Let's get straight to the point. Our guest today is Mikhail Viktorovich Velichko, a writer, candidate of economic sciences, and as he himself adds, a working pensioner. Good evening, Mikhail Viktorovich.
Hello, everyone.
Mikhail Viktorovich, the situation with Ukraine is a rather important topic now, going on in parallel with the fact that soon a meeting of the Security Council will begin. What should civilians do in the current situation?
In general, this is the first question. Where and what should civilians do? If we talk about Russia, then civilians need to remain calm and not fall into hysterics on the theme of consumer rush demand, the ruble exchange rate, and everything else. At the same time, one should understand that times are not easy. And if we talk about Russia, about her economic system, then it is generally not suitable for providing life in the current external political and economic conjuncture. That is, in order for the state to develop successfully, Russia needs thorough macroeconomic reforms stemming from other system-forming principles. And so, we live in a liberal market model. Therefore, to a greater or lesser extent, everyone will be messed around, regardless of what social strata we belong to. It is clear that there will be fewer messed around among the rich, and those who are engaged in small business, whose spectrum of consumption depends on the dollar exchange rate, on the supply of imported components and everything else. For them it will be hard. The decision of the central bank to raise the key rate to 20%, well, in relation to the real sector, this is a stab in the back. Factually, the central bank confirms that it is the main foreign agent in Russia. But the economic system is what it is and cannot be changed overnight. Therefore, one will have to survive as it allows. The main thing is that the fifth column, which also exists, should not interfere with governance and not aggravate the situation that is developing. Well, for the rest, it is necessary to turn to prehistory. If someone thinks that the war began on February the 24th, then he is deeply mistaken. Because if we turn to the prehistory of the question, then Ukraine once had a non-bloc status. Then Ukraine felt like joining NATO. This was expressed in the fact that from 2014-2015, NATO ships were to be based in Sevastopol, and the Russian Black Sea Fleet was to go to Novorossiysk. At the Crimean and other airfields, NATO aircraft could first appear in rotation and then also in other orders, on an ongoing basis. Therefore, those who believe that Russia is somehow getting into other people's affairs, they should answer a simple question. If this happened, how would the security of the Russians be affected by the presence of NATO ships in Sevastopol and NATO aviation at the Belbek airfield in Crimea? How the security of Russians is affected by the presence of biological laboratories on the territory of Ukraine, which are not responsible and accountable before Ukraine for anything, and are doing who knows what there. There is no single reason to believe that this is done exclusively for health purposes. In addition, historically, Ukraine at the time of the collapse of the USSR was a multinational state. Moreover, there was a certain specifics. It historically took shape in such a way that the Russian language has become, for the most part, the language of the urban population, the language of science, industry, technology. And the Ukrainian language, in all its dialects, was the language of the rural population. And in general, if we talk about starting conditions for Ukraine, then at the time of the collapse of the USSR, there were only two republics that could flourish. These are Ukraine and Russia, and they could flourish with one single caveat: intelligent, adequate governance towards the development of culture and the development of the economy. But neither there nor here, unfortunately, was this the case. Therefore, it is better for Ukrainians now not to lean out of the windows when shooting is going on, to remember what was taught in Soviet times in the course of basic military training and civil defense, how to behave in the shelling zone, everything else, and think about what happened before, how they were able to bring Ukraine to the point of becoming a Nazi state. Because the law according to which Russians are not the indigenous population of Ukraine, this is a Nazi law. The law banning the Russian language, this is also a Nazi law. The coming of Banderites to power, the destruction of monuments to Soviet soldiers who fought against fascism, liberated Ukraine from fascism, and the glorification of Nazi war criminals of ethnic Ukrainian origin, this is all an expression of Nazism. Therefore, one should not say that white and fluffy Ukraine is suffering so for no reason, as a consequence of the reasonless aggressiveness of Russia, some power hungriness of the ruling elite of Russia. This is slander on the historical past, the common historical past of the peoples of Russia, Ukraine, Belarus. And one should reflect on how, after what is happening, to start arranging a normal life in Ukraine, where its multinational population can develop their cultures, and where Ukraine will not be a threat to any of its neighbors. Because when the American vice president sits in the chair of the president of Ukraine, well, this is very bad. This is not the friendship of peoples, this is not cooperation with the United States, because the United States is not capable of cooperation. The United States can only govern puppet regimes that depend on it. So, dear compatriots, we need to think about how to live on and survive where hostilities are taking place, and trust the Kiev authorities less, because they did everything to ensure that this situation arose, and that nothing would be done to ensure that, even under the European choice of Ukraine, that Ukraine would maintain good relations with its neighbors. Next question.
Добрый вечер.
Is historical Western Ukraine
Историческое
part of the
Западная
Russian
Украина, она
multinational
входит в
civilization?
русскую многонациональную цивилизацию?
It is certainly a part, only it is more correct to call Transcarpathian Rus, because the Rusains have the right to national revival after the genocide that Austria-Hungary inflicted on them at the beginning of the 20th century. Therefore, if we talk about the Russian world, Transcarpathia is the borders where the Russian principalities were in the period before the invasion of Batu Khan in 1238. Therefore, Transcarpathia is also part of the Russian world, and Rusains have the right to national revival.
Donbass will need to be restored. At whose expense can this project be implemented?
Ultimately, having suffered a defeat in the Cold War in 1991, we are faced with the task of reviving the Russian world. And it will be necessary to revive the Russian world, and not just Donbass, at our own expense, by our own labor, our own creativity, our own thoughts about what kind of future we want to build. Therefore, there is no getting away from this. Everyone will have to labor and contribute to the revival of not only Donbass, but the entire Russian world.
Mikhail Viktorovich, please tell us how you assess the informational support of our army, both on television and on the internet.
In my opinion, it leaves much to be desired. The reasons are simple. There is such a joke, armchair troops. The internet is a field of informational warfare. Everyone writes what they want there. The question arises, who wants to write there? And if you look, it turns out that the armchair troops of the United States, NATO, they are the ones who are writing there. Some of our loners are writing something. Moreover, if you look at the internet, there are a lot of writings that blame Russia for what she has done. Moreover, this applies to both Ukrainian language sites and Russian language sites. One cannot say that this is exclusively written by bots. This is also written by real people. We need to ponder over the question: how weighty and significant this is. First of all, one needs to understand that those who are satisfied with life, they usually do not write anything on the internet about how satisfied they are with life. Dissatisfaction is expressed by people sincerely, because the internet is such a kind of outlet where you can pour out what is accumulated in your soul. And in general, there was almost nothing for this until recently. Well, now in all countries, if you don't pour out your soul, and this does not correspond to the position of officialdom, this may be accompanied by some kind of trouble. Well, for example, in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, the presentation of the Russian point of view on the events taking place in Ukraine can lead to up to 3 years in prison. Therefore, it's necessary to be careful when speaking on the internet. But along with this, one must also understand this technology. Such experiments were carried out. They take kids, Put two pyramids on the table. One is black, the other is white. The children were previously told that when asked what color the pyramids were, they should answer, both are white. And now the children answer, both are white, both are white, both are white. And in their team there are several people who were not informed. In their preponderance, they also answer that both are white, although they perfectly see that one is white and the other is black. That is about the same way all comments, all publications on the internet work. First, they do not represent a representative sample. That is, the statistics of opinions expressed on the internet and the statistics of opinions that are characteristic of society, they differ greatly. The second side of the question. In St. Petersburg on the 24th, there were about 2,000 people at an unsanctioned rally. Novaya Gazeta published photographs, a report from this rally. There may arise a feeling that there are mass protests in Russia against the so-called aggression in Ukraine. But in reality, these 2,000 people, this is approximately 0.03% of the population of St. Petersburg. But if this is submitted, then the instincts of herd pack behavior begin to work. People thoughtlessly think that this is a mass phenomenon, and in order not to be black sheep, they join this alleged mass and do not dare to object. And in general, in the early 2000s, it was generally accepted in Ukraine that Nazis were some kind of loners renegades, whom no one really listens to. Well, and because they do not pose a real threat to the country. This is the technology, that some talk, others don't object. Then an illusory idea is created that this is the opinion of the majority, and in the end, what you get is what you get. Therefore, our television and other mass media pay little attention to exposing various kinds of psychotechniques that form a negative opinion in relation to Russian policy and in relation to the mission of the Russian armed forces in Ukraine. Therefore, we will win. The Russian world will be reborn. But in the process of this revival, there will be a lot to learn and a lot to master.
Mikhail Viktorovich, a rather effective information war has been ongoing against Russia for many years. It is rather difficult to evaluate our results in this war, but as a whole, I think you can do it. So how can we rebuild our propaganda industry, propaganda direction, or information direction, in order to at least achieve some kind of turning point against Western propaganda in this confrontation?
You know, we have already reached a certain turning point in this respect. It is just that the mass media of Russia, since the times, probably even before those of perestroika, they were inclined to express a liberal point of view. And liberalism became so disgusting for the population that the population in general watches little and reads little. Accordingly, if it watches little and reads little, then the population begins to think. And further there arises the question of what the population thinks about. So, what the population thinks about, what it aspires to, what it works for, this is determined by the range of interests that took shape in childhood, in early childhood, in general up to the age of 5 years. Because if we look at the interests that are characteristic of people, then the first group of interests is exclusively individual, consumer everyday and hedonistic interests. This is about how to get pleasure and how not to get displeasure from life. The second group of interests is family everyday interests. At their basis, there is definitely biology, and they boil down to who commands whom in family life. The husband commands his wife, the mother-in-law commands everyone, or the cat commands everyone. So the interests of the first two groups, they need stable financing. In order for financing to be stable, it is necessary to have some kind of professionalism. And therefore, most people who live more or less normally and do not fall into homelessness, they are the carriers of these three groups of interests. And for the most part, they do not reflect on the fact that other people may just have interests that are not included in these three groups. These are interests conditioned by class affiliation, interests conditioned by national affiliation, interests conditioned by confessional, religious affiliation, interests of a statewide scale, which must somehow harmonize within the state the interests of all previously named groups. Further, interests that go beyond the state, interests of a regional civilizational scale, and interests of a global civilizational scale. Now, if people have the interests of only the first three groups, then they are like pawns on a chessboard. They are apolitical. If the interests of these three groups are satisfied, they can live under communism, which they will perceive just as some kind of automatic convergence of circumstances that allows them to live happily. They can live under Nazism, on the condition that Nazism provides them with the satisfaction of the interests of the three groups. And so, if we talk about the attitude towards what is happening in Ukraine, both in Ukraine itself and the attitude towards this in Russia, then the majority of those who are dissatisfied, these are the carriers of these interests of these three groups. They do not ponder on the prospects, on what would have happened if Putin had not intervened and stopped certain processes, first in 2014 and now another intervention. This is not a spontaneous hysterical reaction, and this is not a thirst for power of the Russian elite over Ukraine. This is a stage of the revival of the Russian world. Well, in order to win the information war, and we shouldn't limit ourselves to the term information war, we factually live in the conditions of what in the West is called a hybrid war. We need to clearly express the ideals of the Russian world. We need to work towards the range of interests of people becoming wider than these first three groups, that all people would understand that they are a part of humanity, and accordingly there are humanity-wide interests that do not deny the interests of all previous hierarchically lower nested groups. But hierarchically lower interests cannot be substituted for hierarchically higher ones. Well, if people think that they can, they will inevitably face the fact that their narrow group of interests will be violated in one way or the other. For Ukraine, the only question is, well, now these, in fact, individualistic, family consumer interests have been violated by Putin. If Putin had not violated, then after about 10 years, an attempt by the United States would have been made to use Ukraine against Russia in the regime of the Third Reich. With Ukraine's territorial access to the borders of the Caucasus under the pretext that allegedly our people also live in Kuban, access to the Caspian Sea, because the United States needs a foothold in order to put pressure on Iran from the north, and not only from the sea. Because if you put pressure on Iran only from the sea, then this is not very good logistics. But when there is Ukraine overlooking the Caspian Sea, then yes, then it's easier logistics, and you can more intensively impact Iran and carry out the globalization that Great Britain is conducting through the hands of the United States. Not for 1 year, but approximately from the time of Ivan the Terrible, when Russia in essence became a crypto colony of Great Britain. Therefore, the matter has been neglected for a very long time, but nonetheless, it is necessary to revive the Russian world. Well, what is a hybrid war? A hybrid war is a war by all available means that can damage the enemy and protect oneself from the enemy. At its basis, there is the circumstance that there are objective laws to which the lives of people are subordinate. Objective laws can be divided into 6 groups. The first group, pan-biospheric, they determine the interaction of biological species with each other, the formation of biocenoses, and the interaction of the biosphere and the encompassing natural systems. Species-specific objective laws distinguish man from all other biological species. Noospheric religious objective laws regulate the interrelationship of the carriers of reason. Vernadsky and Teilhard de Chardin, these are not idiots. The noosphere really exists. This is the psyche of the planet, and it has a human aspect. In addition, the prophets are also not idiots or schizophrenics. The Almighty exists, and He is not non-participatory in what is happening on earth. Therefore, religious noospheric objective laws also act. Further, socio-cultural objective laws. Culture is variable, and we can build a culture that will kill a society within a few generations, and we can build a culture that will ensure the harmony of civilization and the biosphere in the continuity of generations and internal harmony in society. That is, then neither the police nor psychiatry will be needed. Further, we do not live in the biosphere. We are protected from the biosphere by the technosphere. We feed on the basis of food production, not gathering. Therefore, there are economic objective laws. Their violation can give rise to economic self-genocide, as it was with us in the 90s. And using them allows one to ensure reasonable prosperity in any home, guarantees to everyone that he will not die of hunger, everything will be fine, his children and grandchildren will receive proper upbringing and education. Well, all this must be governed. There are objective laws of governance. Now Ukraine, like Russia, is the victim of the hybrid aggression of the West against the Russian world. Aggression is expressed in the fact that the victim of aggression is in one way or the other forced, in order that certain objective laws in the life of the victim of aggression would be violated. Protection against aggression consists in not violating these objective laws in one's own society and carrying out enlightening activities in relation to other societies so that aggression on their part becomes impossible. This is, in general, something that we all must do, regardless of our nationality, our confessional prejudices, and everything else that we consider alternatively indisputable, necessary for life. Such opinions about alternativeless indisputability and necessity must be reconsidered according to Sophist, and then everything will be fine.
How to help to understand what's happening to people who are completely zombified by Western false propaganda.
They just need to be shown the facts, when what the propaganda tells does not correspond to life. In order to destroy any ideological conception, one fact which will not fit there is enough. Therefore, such facts must be found and shown, but at the same time, it is necessary to verify the facts, because any conception can also be built on deliberate lies, on fakes. Well, if the conception is built on fakes, it is perceived as real. But then the disappointment will be severe, because reality does not tolerate illusions. And a collision with reality based on illusory ideas about life, it always ends badly. Therefore, the offer to people to think, to expand their horizons, to detune from their prejudices, for someone this is enough. Someone else might take the position, yeah, get out of here, I myself know everything and therefore I will do what I think is necessary. But such a position usually leads to catastrophe.
There are a lot of comments. Some of them are very interesting questions. Let me read a question from a user named Max. Mikhail Viktorovich, the psychodynamics of the Maidan in 2014 of the population of Ukraine, about which the internal predictor of the USSR wrote in an analytical note in 2014 after the Maidan, did it run out of steam?
It did run out of steam. Disappointment with the distant results of the Maidan remains. And some part remains embittered that dreams did not come true. And embitteredness is the result of people not wanting to look at their past and to revise it. Embitteredness is not constructive, it does not create. And those who are in captivity of their own embitteredness will not have anything good in the future until they come to their senses and repent. Moreover, I would like to emphasize that repentance is not an apology. Repentance is a very deep psychological process in which a person must get to the bottom of those nraviya standards in himself, under the impact of which he committed these or those mistakes and evil deeds in the past. Now, if a person has reached this stage and changed his nravia standards in such a way that he cannot reproduce his previous mistakes and evil doingness in some new circumstances, then repentance has been accomplished. And if he insists that he is right, and all the troubles are supposedly pressure from above to test him in steadfastness of faith, then the troubles will be aggravated, because prejudice and dobrosovestchestness, these things are incompatible. Therefore, Ukraine needs to think about, as a result of what and how the state of affairs and processes that are taking place today have arisen. You see, I want to say that you don't have to rely on the West. You don't have to rely on the fact that the West will be able to force Russia to do something. It will be able to force the fifth column of Russia to some action. But Russia is aware that over the past 2 millennia, the West has been waging aggression in relation to Russia for complete destruction. Therefore, all the declarations of the West, its politicians, firstly, they are hypocrites in relation to Russia, and secondly, the Western elites have greatly degraded since Soviet times. And when Westerners representing the state power promise to send a fleet to the shores of Belarus, and make other obviously inadequate statements, then one should not rely on the fact that idiots can help someone in solving their problems. They will not help for two reasons. The first is they are idiots. The second is that they have their own interests, and they do not at all seek to benefit anyone. Just look at history. But not through the prism of a textbook slipped to you at school, but through a different prism. The memories of people who lived and worked in those eras, through fiction, through such an objective science as geography, how the world map has overlapped over the past few centuries, who shaped it and for what. Answer for yourself the question. Yes, Katisak is a tea clipper on the way from China to England, but on the way from England to China, what is it? It is drug trafficking. Remember Operation Unthinkable. This is Churchill in 1945 on the theme of how to re-equip the unfinished off German troops, and together with the British and American troops, move them against the Soviet Union. And if you think that Churchill was an ally of the Soviet Union, this was not the case. This was just a forced circumstance. In reality, Churchill and Hitler, these are two peas in a pod. There are many things in history that do not fall into textbooks, but if you know something, then history will appear completely different. And when Ruhollah Khomeini characterized the USA as Big Satan,
то он ошибся
he was
в одном.
mistaken in one thing.
Не только
Not
США,
only the
но в
USA,
целом
but
это
the West as a
сатанинская
whole is a
культура.
satanic culture.
Если она кому-то
If it helps
поможет,
someone,
то
then
подумайте, в
think
чем
about in what it will help
и что
and
ей
what will
поможет.
happen next.
Mikhail Viktorovich, an interesting question from our audience. I would like to ask it as a continuation of the previous one. Who, in principle, conceived denazification? The internal predictor of the USSR or the global predictor?
Ну, вообще,
Well,
начнем
let's
с
start with
того,
the fact
что у
that the
глобального
global predictor has
предиктора
certain
есть определенные
problems.
проблемы. Ну, скажем так, вот
Well, let's put
глобальный
it this way.
предиктор — это
The
те
global predictor,
политические
this
силы,
is those
которые
political
занимаются
forces that govern
управлением
global history, global politics.
глобальной историей, глобальной политикой. У них одна из
One of their
острейших
most pressing
проблем — это
problems is
либеральная
the liberal
рыночная
market
экономическая
economic
модель.
model.
Она
It gives
порождает
rise to
такую
such
хрень,
rottenness
как
as the
глобальный
global biospheric social
социально-экономический
ecological crisis
кризис
and a great deal of all
и
these
ряд
intrasocial
всех
conflicts.
внутрисоциальных конфликтов. Это
This is
опасно для
dangerous for civilization as a whole.
Поэтому задача
Therefore, the
элиминировать
task is to
либеральную
eliminate the liberal market
экономическую
economic
модель
model
и перейти к
and
другому
move to a
экономическому
different economic structure
в котором бы не было
in which
места
there would be no
для
place for social
социальной
stratification
расслоенности на
into the super
сверхбогатых
rich
и
and a lot of
уйма
beggars,
нищих и
hopelessly poor,
беспросветно нищих,
and there would be no
не
place
было
for a
места
global ecological
глобальному
crisis.
экологическому кризису. Поэтому
Therefore, the world behind the scenes
мировая
is waging a war
цивилизация
against the
ведет
civilized West,
войну против
a
цивилизованного
hybrid war,
Запада,
by means that are
ну
incomprehensible
и
to the
ведет
West.
войну теми средствами, которые для Запада непонятны. И нацизм, как
And
крайнее
Nazism,
выражение
as an
либерализма,
extreme expression of liberalism,
вот такая вот
such a
парадоксальная
paradoxical
вещь.
thing.
Но нацизм — это
Nazism
действительно
is,
крайнее
indeed, an
вырождение
extreme
либерализма.
offspring of liberalism.
Он
It is not
не
needed.
нужен. Поэтому
Therefore,
в данном
in the given
случае
case,
в
on the
вопросе
question of
денацификации
denazification,
ну, интересы
the interests of the
мировой
Russian world and the
мировой
world
истории
behind the
совпадают,
scenes coincide,
как они
just as they
совпадают и в аспекте
coincide in the
ликвидации
aspect of the
либеральной
elimination of the
экономической
liberal-bourgeois
модель
economic
экономического
structure
уклада
on a
глобального
global
капитализма.
scale.
Поэтому тут
So,
так.
this is how it is.
Ну а то,
Well,
что
the fact that
русскому миру
Nazism has never
нацизм
been
никогда
peculiar
не
to the
был
Russian world
свойственен,
is a fact.
ну это факт. Просто
Just look
посмотрите
at
на
those who
тех,
worked in
кто
the so-called
работал в так
prestigious areas
называемых
of the
эффективных
USSR.
сферах деятельности СССР. Там
Everyone
только
was
одни
there,
выходцы из всех
descendants from
народов,
all
которые
peoples
жили на
who lived on
территории
the territory of the
Советского
Soviet
Союза.
Union
Иммигранты, приехавшие в
and
СССР,
migrants who came to the
тоже.
USSR too. If we
Если мы
turn to the
обратимся
imperial
к
period,
имперскому периоду, ну фактически все
well,
народы,
factually, all the
которые
peoples who found themselves
проживали
within the
на
borders of the
Российской
Russian
земле
Empire, for
в
2 or
течение
3
2-3
generations,
поколений
were represented in the
выдвигали
imperial
своих
elite.
представителей в имперскую элиту. Об этом говорят
This is evidenced by the
фамилии тех,
surnames of those who were in the imperial
в
elite.
имперской элите. В
In the
доимперской
pre-imperial
элите,
period,
ну,
one thing was
требовалось
required:
одно — приезжать
come
в
to Russia,
Россию
to
на
Rus, and serve
и
honestly,
служить честно.
that's
Все.
all.
Это
This
с
is
нацизмом
incompatible with
несовместимо.
Nazism.
Да, страна не была
Yes,
раем
the
на
country
земле.
was not a paradise on earth. A crowd
Только
elite culture
элитарная
is a crowd
культура —
elite
это только
culture. An
элитарная
elite is an
культура,
elite. It has its
элита — это
own
элита,
ethics. People are
будет
people.
своя
They have
этика,
their own ethics.
народ — это народ,
Attempts to build
будет
an
своя
all-people
этика.
state,
Попытки
which would be
построения
characterized by a
общенародного
common for all
государства,
ethics,
которое
regardless of social status and
характеризовалось
national origin,
единой для всех этикой, вне
they are
зависимости
also
от
traced throughout the history of
социального
Russia.
статуса и национального происхождения, они тоже прослеживаются. на протяжении всей истории России. Поэтому
Therefore, the
будущее
future is
именно
precisely
за
with the
реализацией
implementation of this
тенденций
tendency on a
глобального
global
изменения.
scale.
Далее.
Mikhail Viktorovich, what role does
Какую
Zhirinovsky
роль
play in
в политике,
politics,
как и
as
Россия в
well as
целом,
in
в
Russia as a
данной
whole,
ситуации, в
this
частности,
situation in
играет
particular,
Жириновский,
given
зная,
that
что
he, in
он, по
fact,
сути,
announced
огласил
the
дату
date of the
операции за
operation a few
несколько
months
месяцев до
before
ее
it
начала,
began,
и после этого
and after
Зеленский
that he fell
вроде
ill,
бы как
and
лишил
now it
поста.
seems he's in a coma?
Well,
Ну, во-первых,
firstly,
надо
it should be
признать, что
admitted
Владимир
that Vladimir
Wolfovich
Wolfovich
очень сильно
Zhirinovsky is an
развитый
intuitively
человек.
developed person.
Но
But
сказать,
one cannot
что
say that his
его
illness is a
заболевание
response to him,
ему
or an act of
попытка
political terrorism
или
for having announced the date
автоматически
of the
поощрение за
operation.
то, что он огласил дату операции, не приходится.
ЛДПР вклад. Здесь никто не примажется. Посмотрите мои выступления в декабре и в ноябре на различных политических массовках, тусовках. Я это и говорил, но своим языком. Как надо с ними разговаривать, что нужно от них требовать. Не надо бряцать оружием. Надо сказать, давайте выполнять. Отказывайтесь, тогда мы можем принять другую программу. А какую вы почувствуете? 4 часа утра, 22 февраля.
Кроме всего прочего,
Among other things, Vladimir Wolfovich, this is public politics.
А вот то, что касается
But as for
внутренней
non-public
политики, это
politics,
тема, которая
this is a
практически не
theme that is not
обсуждается.
publicly discussed.
Но в любом
But in any
государстве
state,
публичная
non-public
политика
politics is
это
much more
гораздо
significant and
более
important
значимо
than public
и
politics.
важная, чем публичная политика. Как связаны
How are public
публичная
politics and
политика
non-public
и
politics connected? Well,
сначала
first,
в
in
непубличной
non-public politics,
политике
a
выражается
certain
или
idea is expressed,
осуществляется
a
некий
certain setting of
целеполагание.
objectives is carried out.
А потом по
Then,
сути
under
идет
these
реализация.
ideas,
В
depending on the
зависимости
scale
от
of these ideas
масштаба
and the scale of politics,
этих идей и масштаба политики, либо
either
средств
the mass
массовой
media or the
информации,
system
либо
of
системы
education
образования
pronounces something,
чего-то произносят, чего-то
publishes
публикуют
something. The ideas
или
become the
становятся
property of wider
достоянием
sections of the
более
population.
широких слоев населения. Если
If these
эти
ideas are
идеи
very
уже
unfamiliar,
привычны, то
then we have
технология
Overton's
обмена
window
данными,
technology,
которая
which was in
использует
use long
западные
before Overton discovered the
информационные
technology and was
технологии,
eventually given the
после
Overton
его
name after his
смерти
death.
ей имя Овертона. Ну а потом уже
And then
публичные
public
политики
politicians act as
действуют
they
так,
see fit,
как
based on
считают
their
нужным,
interests.
исходя из своих интересов. Когда
When
публичная
public politicians are
политика
manipulated behind the
манипулируется
scenes,
из-за кулисья,
well,
это
these are
очень
very rare
редкие
situations, some
ситуации,
kind of bifurcation
какие-то
points,
точки
turning
бифуркации,
points in history.
поворотные моменты истории. А в
But in the
большинстве
majority of
случаев
cases,
долговременные
long-term
процессы
processes of governance are
управления
carried
и
out in such a
формирования
way as to
своевременных
form public
общественных мнений.
opinion in a timely manner.
Ну, я не
I
буду
will not
тыкать
point fingers.
пальчиками. Интернет
The
хранит
internet
память
keeps a
обо
memory of
всем,
almost everything.
почти.
Those who are interested in
Но,
this
конечно,
theme
порой
rummage on the
интернет
internet as to who
до
said
того,
what
когда
and when they
говорил,
said
как
it,
потом это
and how it
выразилось
was
в
later
политике.
expressed in politics.
The question was a tricky one, a little entertaining, distracted our conversation a little. The next question is also related to immediate events. You know, sanctions were introduced against Russia, including technological sanctions. So here's a question from a viewer. Will our country be able to develop normally and maintain a certain level of technological progress in the areas of microelectronics, the internet, everything connected with this in connection with these sanctions? And there are a lot of such questions. In general, this question combines several similar ones.
You see,
Понимаете,
the question should be
вопрос
put more
надо
broadly.
ставить шире. Вот у нас было
It was
принято
customary
верить в
for us to
хороших
argue
медведев
Is Medvedev a good politician, a bad politician? Is he a man of Putin's team or a traitor? And so on and so forth. Analogous questions are now being asked of Nabulina, Silvanov, and others. But practically no one asks the question about the system-forming principles of building the macroeconomic system of Russia. If we talk about system-forming principles and properties and our own creativity in the field of building macroeconomic systems, then everything ended in 1953 with the death of Stalin, in fact, with the murder of Stalin and Beria. What was done in those days, how it interacted with each other, now perhaps you can read in the book Crystal of Growth. And the book Crystal of Growth describes a different organization of the economy, which ensured the colossal pace of economic development, scientific, technological development of the Soviet Union in Stalin's times. And further, the book describes how, after 1953 until 1986, the system was gradually dismantled, and as a result, they came to the conclusion, here the whole system needs to be changed. And as a result, the Americans dictated the Constitution, built a macroeconomic system not at all in the interests of the development of our country. In general, until now, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin and his associates, within the framework of this macroeconomic system, have been smugglingly solving the tasks of the country's development, primarily of a military technical character, which made it impossible to impose a military dictate with respect to Russia. But this does not mean that the tasks of the country's development still need to be solved on the basis of this economic system, which was dictated to us from the outside. And public opinion is quietly being prepared for the fact that in order for the country to successfully develop and overcome scientific, technological dependence on other states, it needs to go through very serious macroeconomic reforms. Therefore, if these reforms will come, and the fifth column will not sabotage them, Russia will have the most efficient economy in terms of scientific technological progress. And the sanctions that the West has imposed on Russia are sanctions based on the assumption that nothing will be done, that Russia will remain the way she is now, in the aspect of the organization of the economy. But in general, one should not entertain such illusions. Dmitry Gennadievich Yevstafiev directly pointed out this topic in the program Evening with Vladimir Solovyov on February the 25th. The European sanctions base is based on one thing, that we will not answer. They are absolutely certain that a comprador group within the Russian elite will convince the government and the supreme commander to continue targeting inflation and will do nothing in return. And then they will succeed because they really hit the most sensitive. This was said on February the 25th.
февраля
On February the 24th, Dmitry Gennadievich spoke about the need to nationalize the elites in the field of education, because our system of education was tailored to serve the liberal economic model, in which Russia is de facto simply a colony of the West, and her population is just one of the many economic resources to which human rights are not spread. That is, the preparation of public opinion for the fact that the organizational principles and functioning procedures in the country's economy will radically change is ongoing, and the psychodynamics of Russian society is also developing in the direction that such reforms would take place.
Will there be a transition to an adequate economy in Russia in the near future? And is there any groundwork for this now?
There is groundwork. Those who are interested in this topic should read Crystal of Growth and should read Economics of Innovational Development. Well, then we need to work to eradicate all the liberal market nonsense from the system of education. Also, for those who are interested, in 2020 we published 2 presentations, one on the labor theory of value, the other, 2 conceptions of money. They are on the internet. Look at those sites where the materials of the internal predictor of the USSR of the conception of social safety are published.
Another economic question. It is simply natural that the theme of technology and the theme of the growth of the ruble, economic problems, are now the hottest on a par with the war in Ukraine. So, is the nationalization of the central bank of the Russian Federation necessary for the transition to an adequate economy in Russia? Nationalization of mineral resources and the introduction of our own state ideology. Is everything correct in this strategic, stage-by-stage plan?
You see, as far as the nationalization of mineral resources is concerned, and all the rest, everything is correct, and everything that concerns the central bank is not so. You see, people need one thing from the credit financial system. It must be a kind of glue that brings together into an integrity the macroeconomic system from a multitude of administratively separate enterprises. The credit financial system is like glue. It is such a metaphor. And further, there arises the question of how this macroeconomic system should work and what role the credit financial system plays in it. Usually, the credit financial system is likened to the circulatory system in the body. Such an understanding is wrong, because the credit financial system, if it is to be likened to something in the organism, it should be likened to the nervous system. Because the credit financial system is an instrument of macroeconomic governance. Factors of governance are the volume of lending and loan rates, tax rates, rates of various payments to insurance funds, pensions, and so on and so forth, taxes, subsidies to manufacturers, subsidies to consumers of products.
И дальше возникает
And then the
вопрос,
question
в
arises,
чьих
in
руках
whose hands
находится
is
этот
this
инструмент?
arsenal? Well,
Вот
look at our modern
смотрите,
system.
наше
The Ministry of
современное
Economic Development is allegedly
Минэкономразвитие у нас
responsible
якобы
for the development of the
ответственен за
economy.
экономики.
The
Центробанк
central bank is
находится
somewhere
где-то
on the
в странах,
sidelines,
и он
and it is the
эмиссионирует
emission
деньги.
center.
Он за что
Does it
несет
answer
решающую
before Russia for
цену?
anything?
Ну, вот в
So, in the Ministry of
Минэкономразвития были
Economic
планы
Development, there were plans for
экономического
economic
развития.
development,
Набиулина, бабах,
Labulina,
ставка
bang,
20%.
a refinancing rate of 20%,
Все планы экономического
or
развития,
plans for
которые
economic
были
development that were
задействованы
drawn
для
up
этого решения,
before this
пошли
decision
прахом.
went to waste. Are there any
Претензий
claims
к
against
Набиулине
Nabulina?
есть? Нет.
No,
В том
including because
числе и
juridically
потому,
the
что
central bank is not
Центробанк
responsible
ни за
to
что
Russia
перед
for
ней
anything.
не отвечает. Поэтому, если
Therefore,
говорить
if we
о
talk
том,
about
как
how the
должна
system of
быть
governance towards the
организована
economy
система
should be
управления
organized,
экономикой,
then
то
everything looks
выглядит
about the
примерно
same.
так же. При главе
At the head of the
государства
state, there
должен
should be a
быть
state planning committee
который,
which,
исходя
oriented on the objectives of
ориентируясь на
politics,
цели политики, формирует
forms the
сценарии
objectives of development of the economy and forms scenarios for the development of the economy. The Ministry of Economic Development should somehow co-participate in this. The Ministry of Economic Development is responsible to State Planning Commission and the head of state for the implementation of the plan. Well, it's clear that such frills as the central bank, independent of anyone, bang bang any 20% rate, or even 200, as it was in the 90s, does not allow either the State Planning Commission or the Ministry of the Economy to implement these plans. What is the conclusion? The Ministry of Finance, as a tool for distributing budgetary finances, should be subordinated to the Ministry of Economic Development. The Ministry of Finance should have an emission center, the so-called central bank. And there can be no central banks in the mode state within a state, in a sovereign economy, working for the interests of social development. But, in connection with the fact that our Duma is not a simple phenomenon, firstly, all deputies are governorially illiterate. Most deputies do not know mathematics at such a level as to understand the mathematical models that stand behind the words that I said about the organization of the system. Moreover, there is also a fifth column in the deputy corps. It simply cannot but be there. What is more, the fifth column may not even suspect that it is the fifth column, since these are sincere people, but the convictions that are characteristic of them, and thanks to which they ended up in the Duma, they are inadequate to the tasks of the development of society. Therefore, Russia lives the way she does. She slurps up those problems that could have been prevented decades ago. This also applies to many problems in external politics. But, nonetheless, the country is developing, and the Russian world will be reborn.
I wanted to tell both you and the audience. Now, according to the Belarusian Foreign Ministry, the second round of negotiations between the Ukrainian side and the Russian side has begun. But so far, of course, there are no results, they have just begun. And such a question connected with Ukraine, with the Ukrainians. The special operations will end. And what should be done later in order to establish a normal relationship with the Ukrainians? Denazification. How should it proceed step by step?
Well, step by step, this is a difficult question. As for the Ukrainians themselves, the number one task is not to partisan and not to bandit. The difference between partisanship and banditry is understandable. Banditry is looting. Wedding in Malinovka, Pan Ataman Grityan of Toride. And partisanism is somewhat different, because in general, partisans, always and everywhere, this is against the regime that is perceived by the local population as an occupational one. But whether they are independent, or whether they have foreign curators who are interested in the ongoing civil war, this is a matter of historical concretics. If we talk about Ukraine, then, in the event of a partisan movement, the partisan movement will be controlled by Western intelligence services, and, accordingly, denazification will begin with them. Further, all the same, the questions are as follows. Something quick is lustration, that is, the removal from office of those who have established themselves as Nazis. In strategic terms, this is the upbringing of new generations in such a way that Nazi delirium is perceived by them as madness or something malicious that is incompatible with human dignity. And if we develop, solve our problems, then Russia, the Russian world, will be attractive. For now, Russia is burdened with her own problems. Many citizens of Russia would gladly escape from her if they had such opportunities. There was a guarantee that life would be easier and better somewhere on the side. But I will say again that for the last 2,000 years, Russia, the Russian world, has been a battlefield. Living on a battlefield is uncomfortable, dangerous, but there are two variants in life. Grass on the battlefield, which the fighting parties can trample and burn, and one of the parties leading the conflict, some for truth, others for falsehood, some for справедливость, others for all permissiveness. Everyone is free to choose where he is, grass on the battlefield, for truth, for falsehood. The opposition of abstract humanism, I am against war, let's live together, this is the position of grass on the battlefield. Those who are for the truth have no objective to burn and trample them, but they are not in general the object of protection in the case of something. But those who are for falsehood, those may have a desire to both burn and trample down, simply in order to create problems for the winner for subsequent times. By the way, this is the explanation of the events of 1937. Trotskyism lost, and in order to discredit the Stalinist USSR, the Trotskyist periphery launched those mass repressions and abuses that Stalin's group could not prevent.
Mikhail Viktorovich, our regular viewer, Azamat Shaykhudinov, has a question for you. And it's very good that you remembered the period of the USSR in the 1930s, about the repressions. So, if Marxism has failed, then what kind of economic model does the Global Predictor plan to implement?
You see, there is no economic model in Marxism. There is simply demagoguery on the themes of a planned economy that works for the interests of the people. That is all. And there is no economic theory in Marxism. Those who want to object, they are advised to master the apparatus of linear algebra and the apparatus of operations research. After that, look at what balance models are and turn to Marx's Capital. Marx in Capital has a scheme of the economy. The first division, the second division, the production of means of production, and the production of consumer goods. And so, they are supposedly exchanging capital. But if a person builds a real model of a multi-sectoral economic system, then, following the path of merging sectors according to these or those identificational features, he will not be able to fit the entire set of sectors into this two-component scheme for the simple reason that they will remain sectors that serve both divisions, both the production of means of production and the production of consumer goods of final products. Therefore, Marx's political economy is plausible. By force of the plausibility, many believe that it explains something in the economy. Yes, it explains something in particularities, but it does not explain macroeconomics and does not describe its work, simply because, if it were so, then capital would be, firstly, much thinner, and it would have a lot of mathematics that would completely cut off the entire humanitarian intelligentsia from this very thing. And some literature, where there are mathematical models, and which would fit in with the political economy of Marxism, this is simply absent for the simple reason that the political economy of Marxism is metrologically inconsistent, and all working, metrologically consistent models are not compatible with this. Any mathematical model, in order for it to be functionally operable, it requires that all its elements be correlated to life in a univocal, understandable way. And when we are offered necessary labor time, surplus labor time, necessary product, surplus product, the transfer of value from the means of production to products, and so on, then, guys, go to the forest, contemplate nature, put things in order in the head, because this is schizophrenia. And then, in general, it turns out that the economy will be planned. There will be a place for market regulation. There will be a place for the manifestation of private entrepreneurial initiative in line with the plan. But the ideological cover for all of this is different. The layman is not interested in it. The layman is interested in him being able to come to the store with his wallet or card and having enough money for what he wants. And if for something expensive he does not have enough, Then there must be a loan, which he can pay off so he can buy it now, or that his income allows him to make savings that will allow him to buy it within a reasonable for everyday life time frame. And how everything works for citizens who have the interests of only three groups: individual personal, hedonistic in essence, family everyday, and financial professional, where and how to receive guaranteed income, on the basis of what activity, they are not interested in such topics. In addition, the culture of thinking of many people does not, unfortunately, allow them to delve into these themes. If someone was able to delve into them, well done, but this is no reason to exalt yourself over those who could not. Because if our society were a society of universal governorial literacy, then many problems would just not be in it.
We are asked a lot of questions in connection with the relations with China, such a period of transition of trade from the West to the East. One of those questions expresses doubt. What do you think about the position of China? Because on the one hand, they seem to maintain relations with us. They are ready to buy additional oil and gas. But now the Asian Infrastructure Development Bank is suspending its activities. How can we assess this? And how likely will it be that we will trade more with China?
Well, China has always had its own interests. This is the first thing. Second, in the 19th century, the great powers, including Russia, offended China in many ways. China remembers this too. Russia has forgotten. China is also a regional civilization within the boundaries of one state. It also has certain problems. And China does not aspire to be a colony of the West. Therefore, if Russia behaves correctly and develops, then relations with China will progressively improve. Up to the erasure of the state border, on the basis of building a certain common culture for the peoples of both civilizations. But these are distant prospects. Well, if the development of Russia is interrupted by force of various reasons, mainly internal, then China can also be the savior of Russian culture. But again, this depends on us, and not on them. Because in China, the vast majority of the population also remembers that China was revived thanks to the help of the Soviet Union. And even during the conflict on Damansky, one of my acquaintances was studying in a military school in China at the time. Chinese political workers at that time told them that the Soviet people are very good people, that China owes a lot to the Soviet Union, but traitorous revisionists have come to power in the Soviet Union who seek to revive capitalism. And as long as the revisionists are in power, normal relations between China and the Soviet Union are impossible.
Поэтому с Китаем не все так
Therefore, with China, not
Китай
everything is
ведет
so simple.
самостоятельную политику,
China is
отстаивает
pursuing an
свои
independent policy based on its own
в этих
interests.
интересах
In these
есть
interests, there are certain
определенные
topics of
интересы
cooperation with
с
Russia,
Россией, но есть и
but there are
определенные
also
интересы
certain topics
с
of
другими
cooperation with other
государствами.
states.
Поэтому могут быть
Therefore,
непонятны
actions by
для
China
России.
may be incomprehensible in Russia as well.
Далее.
Mikhail Viktorovich,
A big question, and in general, we can already move smoothly to a certain logical conclusion of our conversation. What are the steps on all 6 priorities of generalized means of governance that should be taken in our country so that Russia becomes a winner in the given situation and in her subsequent development?
чтобы Россия стала победителем в данной ситуации и в последующем ее развитии.
Вот понимаете,
You see,
когда
when
речь
it comes
заходит
to
о
what
том,
steps
какие
our country
надо
needs to
предпринять
take,
нашей стране, то
then,
прежде
first
всего
of
надо
all, you need
понимать,
to
что
understand that
государственное
state power in our
государство
country was
было
also formed after the collapse of the
сформировано
USSR,
после краха
not by
СССР
us,
не нами.
precisely as a
Было
structural
там
entity.
структурное образование. Кастинг чиновников,
The casting of
депутатов,
officials, the casting of
система
deputies,
подготовки госслужащих, они
the system of
таковы,
training
что
civil
даже
servants, they are
только
such that
единицы
only a
знают
few
о
know
том, что
what the
такое
6 priorities of
система
generalized means of governance are,
управления и как ими пользоваться.
and from these loners,
Должны
maybe
быть единицы.
very, very few know how to use them in general.
Должны быть совсем единицы. Поэтому,
Therefore,
если
if we
говорить
talk
о
about
том,
how our
как
country
нашей
can
стране
use the 6 priorities
пользоваться
of generalized means of governance, then the answer will be simple in terms of vocabulary and complicated in terms of execution.
в смысле лексики и тяжелый в смысле исполнения. Надо
It is
распространять
necessary to spread governorial literacy in society. It is necessary to spread the knowledge that there are 6 groups of objective laws. And further, when this knowledge is disseminated in society, there will be people who will enter the state apparatus having this knowledge at their service. But you yourself understand the process is not easy, requiring that after work people do not stare at the television and do not chug on beer, but continue to work on their personal development and enter the contours of noospheric religious governance, impacting the psychodynamics of society, so that it works to ensure that the state power in Russia becomes competent, functionally capable, and expresses the interests of the whole people, and not the interests of these or those elite corporative groups, including transnational elite corporative groups.
Такой тоже от зрителей.
Shouldn't the state and society first take up the upbringing of humans with a capital letter, who, under the guidance of the Almighty, will then build a better future, first for Russians and then for all of humanity?
Due to the fact that we do not live on a separate planet called Russia, but we live on Earth where there are many other countries, and there is interaction with the outside world, and the impact of the outside world on Russia, this way turns out to be impossible. It will be necessary to advance towards humanness in interaction with the outside world, helping to ensure that it also moves towards humanness. We differ from other cultures only in that this theme is being discussed here, and we have something to say. In most other countries, if these questions are raised, they will not understand what it is and what it's about.
Далее.
Михаил Викторович, много очень комментариев. Вас благодарят участники нашей встречи.
A lot of comments. The participants of our meeting thank you. I'll post their screen impressions. They thank us for broadcasting. And I would like to approach the next question about the war in Ukraine. Basically, they ask, of course, about the timing. How can all this be implemented? How long will the war in Ukraine last?
I will not answer this question. The reason is simple.
Причина простая.
The announcement of any information
Оглашение любой
is either a
информации
governorial
для
act
управления
or a loss of
ситуацией,
governance.
либо потери управления. В общем, не все надо
In general,
оглашать, хотя бы
not
потому,
everything needs to
чтобы
be
аналитики
disclosed,
зарубежных
if only
государств
because the analysts of
не
foreign
зря
special
получают
services
свои
do not
зарплаты.
receive their salary in vain.
Понимаю вас.
Хотя же
But
все равно
they will
это
still
не
receive it in
зря,
vain by force of the
в силу
fact
того, что
that they are
обречены на
doomed to
ошибки
mistakes
по
due to
своей
their
неправильности,
unpreviousness and striving for the wrong objectives.
устремленности не к тем целям.
Why was the place of negotiations chosen in Belovezhskaya Pucha? Who is this matrix playing for?
Ну,
Well,
во-первых,
first of
я
all,
выбирал
I
это.
didn't choose this place. The
Матрица,
matrix,
сами
you
знаете,
yourself know what it is connected with,
но
but the
откат
rollback of the
матрицы
matrix
тоже
can be carried out
может
along the
быть
same track,
вторым.
along which it was.
Далее.
Так. Очень много, конечно же,
A lot
провокационных
of course,
комментариев. Мы не
provocative
будем их
comments.
зачитывать в
We will
силу
not
того, чтобы
count,
сохранить,
in order to keep our broadcast extremely
скажем так,
calm.
спокойный наш эфир. Так. И,
The audience says
наверное,
thanks for the fact that we
благодарят
use their
зрителей за
questions, in
то, что они
addition to
использовали их
those that
вопросы,
we
помимо
ourselves
тех, что,
prepared.
значит, подготовили сами. Так. И, наверное, зададим...
The
Затрагивал
theme of
тему
education was
про
touched upon
образование
in
в нашем
today's
сегодняшнем
broadcast.
эфире. Это в целом
This
тема
theme
напрямую
is
связана с
directly
деятельностью
related to the
газеты
activities
«Концептуал»,
of the
с
publishing
вашей
house
деятельностью,
Conceptual,
деятельностью ваших
with
коллег.
your activities,
Так вот,
the activities of your colleagues.
что будет с
What will
образованием в
happen to
декабре?
education?
Возможен ли
Is
вообще
it possible
уход
at all to move
от
away from
либеральных
liberal
тенденций,
tendencies,
от
from
некого
this
либерализма
liberalism in
в
education and
образовании и
enlightenment?
просвещении?
It is
Возможно
possible and
и
obligatory.
обязателен. В каком
In what
направлении
direction it's
надо
necessary to
работать?
work?
Ну, в
Well, in
основах
fundamentals of sociology, there are several
разделах,
sections
посвященных тематике
devoted to the
образования.
thematics of education.
Кроме этого, есть
In
аналитическая
addition,
записка,
there is an analytical
из
note,
раздела
an excerpt from one of the sections of the fundamentals of sociology dedicated to the system of education. It is on the internet. It speaks both about the problems of the historically established system of education and about ways to solve this very problem. If I'm not mistaken, this is a note from 2016 and is called On the System of Education. It includes sections, the results of the development of the system of education under the power of the biblical project, and the second section, what the school should be like. This is what needs to be learned and promoted. Well, and the most important of what needs to be understood is that, after all, the basis is not teaching, but self-education.
в той системе
Therefore,
образования,
the sooner the child is involved in the process of self-education, the better.
90-е годы. По сути, это
Then he will be able to
система,
overcome all the stupidities
пока не
and abuses
закончил,
that exist in the system of education that is being imposed on us, was imposed in the 90s. In essence, it was subversion,
выработать
for which no
механизм.
one has yet been held accountable,
И
and a fact about
либерализм
which not everyone is even aware,
вообще
to say
надо
nothing of working out an
затронуть
alternative
тему
to this.
либерализма. Вот есть
And
такой
liberalism
банк,
will leave
вы
from
как-то в
education.
программе у Соловьева сказали,
In general, it
что
is necessary to
русский
touch
Петрович
upon the theme of
либерального
liberalism.
поведения.
There is such an Igor
Знаете,
Mantusov,
либо русский
and he once said on
патриот,
Solovyov's
либо с
program that
либеральными
he was a
убеждениями.
Russian
А вот
patriot with liberal convictions.
один
You
из
see,
аспектов
either it's
либеральных
Russian
убеждений
patriot
это
or with liberal
либерально-рыночно-экономическая
convictions,
модель.
because one of the aspects of liberal
Всякий, кто
convictions
проповедует
is the liberal market
либерально-рыночную
economic model.
экономическую модель,
Anyone who
вообще
preaches a liberal market economic
либо
model,
идиот,
and in
который вообще
general,
ничего
the
не
principles of
понимает и не
liberalism,
действует в
is
жизни,
either an
или
idiot
живет в
who
мире
does not at all
абстракций.
understand or at all feel anything in life,
Главным
and lives in a
образом
world of some kind of abstractions, mainly
Если
juridical
он не
ones.
идиот,
If he is
то
not an
это
idiot,
аналог Павла
then this is an
Ивановича
analog
Чичикова
of
и
Pavel
Остапа
Ivanovich Chichikov
Ибрагимовича Бендера.
and Ostap
Это
Ibrahimovich
комбинатор,
Bender.
который хочет
This is a
пошарить в
schemer
ваших
who wants to
кошельках
rummage through your wallets
под
and
защитой
pockets under
закона
the
и на
protection of the
законных
law
основаниях.
and on legal grounds.
Либо
Or
это
this is a
предатель,
traitor
который
who
право
transfers the
пошарить
right to
в
rummage in
наших
our pockets
карманах
to some foreign
передает
financial
каким-то зарубежным
institutions and their owners.
финансовым институтам и их хозяевам. Поэтому тут
Therefore, there is one
что-то
thing
одно.
here. Either
Либо
a Russian
русский
patriot
патриот
without any
без
liberalism,
какого-либо
or
либерализма,
liberalism. But then,
либо
excuse me, you
либерализм
are an
это
enemy of
опять
Russia.
знаменитый враг России. Даже если ты этого не понимаешь,
Even if you
есть
don't
человек,
understand this,
которого тупо
then you are a
используют
zombie
против
who is
России.
stupidly used against Russia with all your good intentions, honesty, and everything else.
Если с этим не
If you don't
согласен,
agree with
то
this,
школу
then
заучи.
go to school,
Учить
sit down at the
историю,
textbooks,
математику,
study history,
изучать
study mathematics, study economic
экономические
theories,
теории и выявлять
and
их
identify their
несостоятельность,
inconsistencies, and
думать
ponder
о том,
on
как
how to build a society
все
in
это
such a way that
построить
there is
так,
one ethics for
чтобы
everyone, both
была
in the
наука
economy
для
and in
всех,
politics.
и
There would be no
никому
place for
не
great
было в
schemers.
политике место великим комбинаторам. Ну, коли речь пошла о великих комбинаторах,
Well, if we are talking
знаете,
about great schemers, you understand, this is not a mystery.
это не
This is a
загадка, это
tragedy.
трагедия. Вот прошел на Украине фильм
The
«Слуга
series
народа».
Servant of the People was shown in Ukraine.
Ребята,
Guys,
как вы
how
могли
could you vote for an
голосовать
actor?
за актера? С чего вы взяли, что то, что фильм,
Why did you get the idea
это
that the series was a
последствия
premise to
реакции?
reality? If
Если
there is any
случится
medical
какое-нибудь
misfortune, will you be going to
медицинское
Dr.
несчастье,
House
вы
on the
что,
table?
к доктору Хаусу ляжете на стол?
You will be
Или
looking
будете
for
искать
either a
либо
folk
народного
healer
целителя,
or a
либо
normal
нормального
qualified
врача,
doctor who can help.
квалифицированного, который может оказать помощь.
How
Как
can you vote
можно
for an actor?
голосовать было за актера? Если вы хотите сказать, что Рейган был
If you want to
актером,
say that Reagan
да,
was an
Рейган
actor,
был актером,
yes, Reagan was an actor,
но когда
but
Рейган
when
стал
Reagan became
президентом,
president,
от
he
него
was still only
потребовали
required to play the role
полного
convincingly.
изображать убедительно. А для того, чтобы
And in
он
order for
умел
him to have something
что-то
to portray,
изображать,
a team
работала
of
команда
professionals worked.
профессионалов. Чем вы
What were you
думали,
thinking when you voted for Zelensky?
Еще есть вопрос?
Only grateful comments remain. They wish you good health. Thank you for the broadcast.
Спасибо.
Thank you. I will
Спасибо.
try to
Я
justify the good
постараюсь
wishes and
оказать
hopes.
добрые пожелания